My uncle and step-aunt secretly replaced my door locks to steal my apartment to give it to my expecting step-cousin, but when I retaliated, everything backfired spectacularly. I, 32M, never thought a simple change of locks could unravel the fabric of my life. It started with a quiet suspicion, a feeling that something was off the moment I tried to enter my apartment one evening after a grueling 12-hour shift at the construction site. The key slid into the lock, but wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, thinking maybe the mechanism was just stiff from the recent rain, but nothing happened. That's when the nightmare began. My uncle had been acting strange for weeks, showing up unannounced with my step-aunt, always asking pointed questions about my lease agreement and whether I was planning to renew. I'd inherited this rent-controlled apartment from my grandmother 2 years ago, a small but decent place in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. The rent was a fraction of market value, and I knew how valuable that made it. What I didn't know was how far family would go to take it from me. Standing there in the hallway with my useless key, I felt a cold realization wash over me. They had secretly replaced my door locks, cutting me out of the home I'd worked so hard to maintain and improve. Their plan was becoming clear: hand over my apartment to my expecting step-cousin, a move that felt like a betrayal so deep it cut through every family tie I thought we shared. But I wasn't about to let them win without a fight. The building superintendent confirmed my worst fears when I tracked him down in the basement. He told me my uncle had come by 3 days earlier with what looked like official paperwork, claiming there had been a family emergency and he needed to secure the apartment temporarily. The super had been paid well for his cooperation and silence. My uncle had spun some story about me being hospitalized and unable to manage my affairs, showing documents that looked legitimate enough to fool someone who didn't want to ask too many questions. What followed was a game of shadows and secrets, where every move I made to reclaim what was mine only seemed to pull me deeper into a web of deceit and unexpected consequences. I realized I was dealing with people who had planned this meticulously, and my initial anger gave way to something colder and more calculated. I spent the next few days watching the building from a coffee shop across the street, noting every visitor, every whispered conversation near my door. My step-cousin showed up twice, her pregnancy clearly visible now, looking around nervously as my step-aunt guided her through what I could only assume was a tour of her future home. The sight of them discussing paint colors and furniture arrangements in the hallway made my blood boil. My retaliation began with small acts that I hoped would send a message. I had spare keys hidden in places they didn't know about, so changing the locks back when they weren't around became my first move. I also started slipping notes under the door, carefully worded hints that I knew their scheme and wasn't going to disappear quietly. The notes were anonymous, but specific enough to let them know someone was watching. But the family drama escalated quickly beyond what I had anticipated. My uncle confronted me outside my workplace, his words laced with threats disguised as concern for my mental health. He suggested I was having some kind of breakdown, that I was imagining things and needed help. Meanwhile, my step-aunt tried to play the peacemaker when she called me, all the while plotting behind my back to make the apartment transfer seem legitimate. The step-cousin, caught in the middle of this mess, seemed torn between loyalty to her parents and fear of what was happening. Her pregnancy added a fragile urgency to the chaos, and I could see the stress wearing on her every time I spotted her near the building. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part remembered that she was benefiting from their theft of my home. I discovered they had been forging documents to make it appear as though I had voluntarily transferred the lease. My step-aunt worked at a law office and had access to official letterhead and legal language that could fool most people. They had created a paper trail showing that I was relocating for work and had requested the lease be transferred to family members. The forgeries were sophisticated enough that they might have worked if I hadn't been there to contest them. My next move was to install a hidden camera in the hallway, disguised as a smoke detector that I mounted near my door. The footage I captured over the following week was damning. I watched my uncle and step-aunt bringing contractors to measure for renovations, my step-cousin selecting appliances from catalogs while sitting on what used to be my couch, and worst of all, my step-aunt coaching my step-cousin on what to say if anyone asked questions about the sudden change in occupancy. But just when I thought I had enough evidence to expose them, everything backfired spectacularly. A trusted friend, someone I had confided in about the situation and asked for advice, turned out to be feeding information to my uncle. I learned this when my uncle confronted me with details about my surveillance activities that only my friend could have known. The betrayal hit harder than the original theft because I had voluntarily shared my vulnerabilities with someone I thought cared about my well-being. The apartment management company got involved after receiving what they believed were legitimate complaints about my behavior from multiple tenants. My uncle had orchestrated a campaign to make me look unstable, using my own defensive actions as evidence of erratic behavior. Legal notices and eviction threats started arriving, complicating matters in ways I hadn't foreseen. I found myself fighting not just for my home, but for my dignity and sanity as the narrative about my mental state spread through the building. The lines between ally and enemy blurred as neighbors I had known for years started avoiding me in the hallways. My uncle's story about my supposed breakdown was convincing enough that people began treating me with a mixture of pity and fear. The stakes grew higher than I ever imagined when I realized that losing this battle wouldn't just cost me my apartment. It would destroy my reputation and credibility in ways that could affect my job and future housing prospects. As I dug deeper into their scheme, I uncovered a more extensive conspiracy than I had initially realized. My step-aunt had been researching rent-controlled apartments throughout the city, identifying vulnerable tenants who might be susceptible to similar tactics. My case was apparently a test run for a broader operation they were planning. They had identified elderly tenants, people with mental health issues, and others who might not be able to effectively fight back against sophisticated legal manipulation. The discovery that I was just the first victim in a planned series of housing thefts changed everything. This wasn't just about family greed or my step-cousin's need for affordable housing during her pregnancy. This was about two people who had decided to make a business out of exploiting legal loopholes and family relationships to steal homes from vulnerable people. I realized that my friend's betrayal wasn't random either. My uncle had approached him weeks before I had confided anything, offering him money to monitor my activities and report back. The friendship I thought was genuine had been compromised from the beginning, which explained how my uncle always seemed to be one step ahead of my plans. The evidence I had gathered through my surveillance was more valuable than I initially understood. The recordings showed not just their theft of my apartment, but discussions of their future targets and methods. I had accidentally documented the planning stages of what amounted to an organized housing fraud scheme. Armed with this broader understanding of their operations, I developed a more comprehensive strategy for fighting back. Instead of just trying to reclaim my apartment, I decided to expose the entire conspiracy and protect their future victims. I reached out to a tenant rights organization that specialized in housing fraud cases, providing them with copies of all my evidence. The legal aid attorney who reviewed my case was shocked by the sophistication of the scheme and the quality of evidence I had gathered. She explained that what my uncle and step-aunt were doing constituted multiple felonies, including fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The case was strong enough that law enforcement would likely be interested in pursuing criminal charges beyond just the civil matter of my lease. But my uncle wasn't finished with his manipulations. When he learned that I had involved outside organizations, he escalated his campaign to discredit me. He filed a restraining order against me, claiming that my surveillance activities constituted stalking and harassment. The order was granted based on his fabricated evidence and testimony from my former friend, effectively barring me from my own building. The restraining order created a catch-22 situation where I couldn't access my apartment to gather more evidence, but I also couldn't prove my case without that evidence. My uncle had calculated this move perfectly, using the legal system's protective mechanisms against me. For several weeks, I was effectively homeless while still paying rent on an apartment I couldn't enter. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Another tenant in the building, an elderly woman who had initially been suspicious of my behavior, approached me with information that changed everything. She had been documenting strange activities in the building for months, including my uncle's visits and the unusual amount of paperwork being exchanged with the building management. She revealed that my uncle had approached her as well, making subtle inquiries about her lease terms and family situation. His questions had made her uncomfortable, and she had started keeping detailed notes about his visits. Her documentation provided an independent record of his activities that corroborated my claims and showed a pattern of targeting vulnerable tenants. More importantly, she had recorded one of my uncle's conversations with the building superintendent where he explicitly discussed the forged documents and his plans for additional apartment acquisitions. The recording was clear evidence of criminal intent that couldn't be dismissed as family drama or mental health issues. With this new evidence, the tenant rights organization was able to get the restraining order dismissed and file criminal complaints against my uncle and step-aunt. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into the housing fraud scheme, and I was finally able to return to my apartment. But the revenge I had sought came at a cost I hadn't anticipated. The criminal investigation revealed that my step-cousin had been more involved in the scheme than I initially realized. She wasn't just a passive beneficiary, but had actively participated in creating false documents and misleading building management. Her pregnancy, which I had seen as making her a sympathetic figure, had actually been used as a manipulation tool to gain sympathy and avoid suspicion. The legal proceedings tore through our extended family like a wildfire. Relatives who had initially supported my uncle and step-aunt turned against them as the evidence of their criminal activities became public. My step-cousin lost her job when her employer learned about the fraud charges, and the stress of the legal battle reportedly contributed to complications with her pregnancy. The family fractures deepened in ways that couldn't be repaired. Cousins stopped speaking to each other, holiday gatherings became impossible, and decades of family relationships were destroyed. The apartment, once a symbol of my independence and connection to my grandmother's memory, became a battleground of broken trust that left scars on everyone involved. My former friend faced his own consequences when his role in the conspiracy came to light. The tenant rights organization pursued charges against him for his part in the scheme, and his betrayal became known throughout our social circle. The isolation he experienced was severe enough that he eventually moved to another city to escape the reputation he had earned. The criminal trial lasted 8 months and resulted in convictions for my uncle and step-aunt on multiple fraud charges. They received prison sentences and were ordered to pay restitution not just to me, but to other tenants they had targeted or planned to target. My step-cousin received probation due to her pregnancy and cooperation with prosecutors, but her involvement in the scheme followed her for years afterward. The building management company faced its own legal consequences for their role in enabling the fraud. The superintendent was fired and faced criminal charges for accepting bribes, while the company paid significant fines and was required to implement new verification procedures for lease transfers. But through the chaos, I learned something vital about resilience and the price of standing up for oneself. The victory felt hollow in many ways because of the family relationships that were destroyed and the realization that people I had trusted were capable of such elaborate deceptions. The apartment remained mine, but it never felt the same after everything that had happened there. The story didn't end with a neat resolution where justice prevailed and everyone learned valuable lessons. Instead, it ended with a hard-earned understanding that some battles change you forever, regardless of whether you win or lose. The cost of fighting for what was right included losing faith in people I had loved and trusted, and that loss couldn't be undone by legal victories or criminal convictions. Years later, I still live in the same apartment, but I've never forgotten the lesson that family ties can be both a source of strength and a weapon used against you. The experience taught me to be more careful about who I trust and to always verify important information independently, but it also showed me that standing up for yourself is sometimes worth the cost, even when that cost is higher than you ever imagined it could be.